The coalition of alien powers struck with a certainty born of arrogance. To them, Earth was nothing more than a speck clinging to its single star, a stubborn world whose people dressed their weakness in empty words of diplomacy. Again and again, fleets crossed the void to probe defenses, destroy colonies, and test how long the humans could endure. Each campaign ended in the same pattern: overwhelming firepower directed against the species that appeared fragile, backward, incapable of truly joining the wider stage of galactic empires. They believed resistance was futile and surrender inevitable, yet what puzzled many outsiders was the humans' refusal to break. Every incursion was met with a plea for peace, an insistence on dialogue, and an appeal to mutual coexistence. Earth's envoys spoke with steady courtesy, even while their outer settlements burned. On the surface it seemed like cowardice or delusion, a refusal to recognize reality. The invaders mocked it as laughable. Why speak of peace while one's ships are shattered? But those words carried an edge the attackers never stopped to consider. Humanity's leaders repeated them not because they lacked strength but because they chose patience. The aggressors mistook patience for weakness, courtesy for capitulation. The first colonies to fall were portrayed across galactic channels as trophies. Alien commanders showcased wreckage and prisoners, feeding the illusion of easy dominance. But beneath the spectacle, subtle changes began taking shape. Earth's fleets adjusted their patrols in quiet ways, their orbital defenses expanded, and supply lines were quietly rerouted. Outsiders did not recognize the careful method behind the response. To them, it seemed only scattered resistance. To the humans, it was preparation. As years passed, the rhythm of attacks grew familiar. Each alien coalition raid pressed deeper, always expecting Earth to sue for peace. Instead, the humans rebuilt. Families mourned, industries shifted, and entire generations began to whisper that someday the mask of patience would slip. Yet outwardly, the official posture never changed. Broadcasts continued to insist on friendship, apologies were offered even after massacres, and captured humans spoke with an unnerving calm that left some alien captors unsettled. Within councils of the invaders, small voices began to question. If Earth was truly as frail as believed, why had they not begged for mercy? Why had a species with so little apparent strength survived repeated invasions? Their colonies were scorched, yet they returned stronger each cycle. The doubts were dismissed by most, brushed aside by prideful leaders unwilling to admit that they might be misjudging the species they tormented. They interpreted every human plea as evidence of desperation, never as strategy. On Earth itself, ordinary people carried on with grim determination. Cities bore scars of orbital bombardments, but reconstruction crews worked without pause. Spaceports expanded rather than shrank, and enlistment surged as countless young men and women volunteered for defense forces. In public speeches, officials continued to sound measured and conciliatory, yet their words carried a strange weight, sorrow tempered by steel, grief hidden behind controlled tones. Humanity, as it always had through history, endured loss with clenched resolve. The coalition's next offensive grew bolder. They spoke openly of final conquest, of ending the charade of diplomacy once and for all. Fleets massed in the void, shimmering armadas confident that a single overwhelming strike would force surrender. Their soldiers jeered at intercepted human transmissions, mocking the endless calls for civility. They did not realize those words were the last thread holding back what lay beneath. The pattern had become so predictable that even neutral observers began to wonder. Why did Earth always answer violence with courtesy? Why did they never unleash reprisals of equal magnitude? Some theorized they lacked the capacity, others suggested cultural weakness, a species too sentimental for the brutality required to survive galactic politics. No one considered the possibility that humans were capable of far more than they allowed anyone to see. By the time the coalition assembled its greatest strike force, Earth's courtesies were already losing their warmth. Statements still spoke of peace, but the tone had hardened, edged with warning. Where once officials begged for coexistence, now they demanded an end to aggression. Yet the invaders were deaf to the change. Their certainty was unshakable. They prepared for another strike, confident that humanity would bow as every other minor world had done before them. The stage was set by their own arrogance. Humanity had offered every chance to stop. The patience of Earth had been vast, its endurance proven again and again. But patience was not infinite. Beneath the courteous words, the grief of billions was building into something else, something colder. Soon, the galaxy would discover that when humans spoke politely under fire, it was not weakness but warning. They were giving their enemies the final opportunity to reconsider. And if that opportunity was ignored, the mask would break, revealing a species the galaxy had never truly seen. Within the grand chambers of the alien coalition, the atmosphere carried an air of smug certainty. Reports of shattered human colonies and intercepted transmissions convinced most leaders that Earth's will was brittle, held together by hollow declarations. To them, the humans were a stubborn nuisance, incapable of conceding their weakness but too fragile to stand against sustained aggression. Yet, scattered among the voices of arrogance, faint warnings began to surface. A handful of commanders muttered uneasily about inconsistencies. Why did every campaign end with fewer losses than expected? Why did Earth's fleets never collapse entirely, always retreating in disciplined formations rather than breaking into chaos? These questions were brushed aside, drowned beneath laughter and confidence. Human emissaries continued their cycle of appeals. Across the galactic networks, they appeared almost ritualistic in their restraint. The faces of ambassadors spoke of grief but never rage, their voices composed even when recounting the obliteration of cities. To many, this was proof of an inherently timid species. To others, it was unsettling, a demonstration of control so absolute that it bordered on unnerving. The coalition dismissed this as cultural peculiarity, never realizing that control was cultivated through centuries of surviving catastrophes greater than they could imagine. Meanwhile, subtle maneuvers unfolded behind the veil of courtesy. Earth's ships adjusted their routes and patterns that looked random to outsiders but formed deliberate preparations. Defensive satellites multiplied in orbits where none were expected, disguised as simple communication relays. Fleets practiced silent repositioning, maintaining distance that gave no hint of larger intent. On the surface, all appeared unchanged, a beleaguered planet begging for peace. Beneath that appearance, foundations of something vast were being set into place. In human councils, the language of diplomacy shifted with careful precision. Gone was the endless repetition of apologies for defending their own people. Instead, the words grew sharper, carved with a tone that was neither plea nor threat but something in between. They reminded the galaxy that patience was not weakness and endurance was not submission. Yet still, those words were ignored. The invaders had long ago convinced themselves that humans simply lacked the stomach for decisive retaliation. Whispers traveled between alien officers who had faced humans directly. They spoke of captured soldiers who refused to break under interrogation, of civilians who rebuilt ruined homes with terrifying speed, of fleets that maneuvered with a cunning that suggested deep reserves of tactical experience. But each time such stories reached higher councils, they were silenced. The coalition's leadership had no appetite for doubt. Pride demanded that they continue the narrative of an easy victory, for to admit otherwise would be to acknowledge the possibility of error. Human history, though largely unknown to outsiders, was alive in the minds of Earth's people. Generations of wars, revolutions, collapses, and rebirths had forged a temperament unlike any other species. Courtesy in the face of violence was not surrender, it was discipline. A conscious decision to measure when to unleash the terrible capacity they carried. Those who looked deeper saw glimpses of that truth, but they were too few to sway the majority. When the coalition's greatest armada gathered, the humans sent one more message. It lacked the ornament of earlier declarations. There was no lengthy appeal to reason, no elaborate assurances of goodwill. Instead, it was stripped down to raw clarity, carrying a resonance that unsettled even those who scoffed at it. "Stop attacking, or we stop pretending to be courteous." The phrasing was strange to alien ears, awkward in translation, yet heavy with something that defied dismissal. Some laughed, others sneered, but a few shifted uneasily, sensing that they had been given a final warning disguised as rhetoric. For the first time, the galaxy glimpsed a fracture in the mask humanity had worn. The tone was colder, sharper, the edge of steel emerging from beneath the velvet. Still, The coalition pressed forward, intoxicated by the momentum of conquest. They could not fathom that the very restraint they ridiculed was the only thing holding back forces they had never faced. The stage was set, not by human weakness but by alien arrogance, and with the final warning delivered, the moment of patience was nearly at its end. The coalition dismissed the warning as another hollow phrase from a people too polite to act with force. Their fleets advanced in confidence, vast armadas layered with the finest weapons their empires had engineered. What they did not know was that humanity had never been defenseless, only silent. At the appointed hour, the silence broke. Entire constellations of dormant satellites powered on, revealing themselves not as harmless relays but as kinetic batteries capable of striking at relativistic speeds. Beams of accelerated metal tore through command ships before many even realized they had entered firing range. From the blackness between stars emerged vessels that had remained hidden for decades, ships built in secrecy and tested far from the eyes of the galaxy. Cloaked in radar-absorbing alloys and shielded from conventional scans, they moved with purpose and precision. Where alien fleets expected scattered defenders, they found formations drilled with the memory of countless wars on Earth. Human tactics combined ruthless efficiency with unpredictability, every maneuver designed not just to win but to terrify. Psychological warfare followed the opening strikes. Human signals flooded alien channels, not as desperate pleas but as cold, precise statements in flawless translation. Voices recited casualty counts in the invaders' own languages, listing the names of commanders seconds before their ships disintegrated. It was not taunt but demonstration, proof that Earth had been listening, cataloging, and preparing all along. The coalition began to realize their enemies knew more about them than they had ever admitted to themselves. Where alien strategy relied on overwhelming numbers, human doctrine turned the battlefield into a predator's hunt. Fleets lured opponents into asteroid fields seeded with hidden rail guns. Supply lines were severed by unmanned drones operating on algorithms designed to mimic pack hunters. Every engagement was crafted to bleed morale as much as destroy ships. Casualties mounted, but what broke the invaders was not the loss of vessels. It was the realization that humans fought with a kind of fury restrained by discipline, striking not blindly but with an intelligence that anticipated each reaction. Entire armadas began to vanish in silence. One moment they were advancing confidently, the next they were consumed by coordinated detonations that left only wreckage. Survivors described scenes where every possible escape was already accounted for, as though humans had studied their tactics for generations. The truth was close enough to make the rumor terrifying. Earth had indeed studied them, quietly absorbing every scrap of information while feigning weakness. Now that preparation had become execution. The brutality shocked even hardened soldiers. Where most species sought decisive victories with minimal cruelty, humans displayed an indifference to limits once their restraint had been abandoned. Captured ships were not merely disabled but systematically dismantled, their crews left with no illusions about survival. Prisoners reported interrogations carried out not with rage but with an icy detachment that suggested humanity was not fighting for vengeance but for finality. To the coalition, this was alien. To humanity, it was history repeating itself. For centuries, humans had waged wars that reshaped continents, toppled empires, and ended with entire cities erased. They carried those lessons into the stars, and when they ceased pretending at courtesy, they drew from a reservoir of violence that few could comprehend. Now, unleashed on a galactic scale, that history became nightmare. The coalition's command structure fractured under the weight of sudden losses. Officers who once laughed at human broadcasts now begged for clarity, wondering if peace was still possible. But the time for negotiation had passed. Every plea was met with silence, followed by the methodical destruction of another fleet. The galaxy was learning the consequence of mistaking patience for weakness. Humanity had never lacked power, only the will to use it. Once that will was released, nothing could contain it. Panic spread faster than the destruction itself. The coalition had believed that their fleets were indestructible, that centuries of dominance guaranteed victory, yet messages from the front told a different story. Fragmented transmissions described annihilation so complete that few survivors remained to give testimony. Those who did return were broken, their voices unsteady as they spoke of enemies who fought without hesitation, without mercy, and with a precision that stripped away every illusion of superiority. Word carried through the galaxy that the humans were no longer restrained, and the impact was immediate. Civilian populations within allied empires trembled at rumors of human fleets appearing out of nowhere, striking with impossible speed and vanishing before retaliation could form. Even neutral powers, those who had watched the conflict with detached curiosity, now re-evaluated their stance. If Earth could dismantle the strongest coalition ever assembled, what chance did anyone else have in resisting them? Diplomats scrambled to draft emergency proposals, but hesitation lingered, paralyzed by disbelief that a species so recently dismissed as insignificant could alter the balance of power overnight. The coalition's leadership fell into bitter infighting. Some demanded escalation, advocating for the release of planet-killing weapons in retaliation, but others argued that such measures would only provoke a counterstroke of equal or greater magnitude. Their debates were poisoned by fear. They could no longer deny what was happening. Every reinforcement dispatched vanished, every reinforcement stranded by sabotage or ambush. Human strategy did not simply destroy fleets, it unraveled the confidence of entire civilizations. The stories circulating were more damaging than the losses themselves. Accounts from captured officers painted the same picture: humans who spoke in their captors' tongues with unsettling fluency, humans who seemed to know enemy plans before they were executed, humans who could turn even disadvantage into opportunity. The realization spread that Earth had not been learning in isolation. They had been listening, infiltrating, gathering, and cataloging every vulnerability across the coalition. That patience, once ridiculed, now appeared terrifying in retrospect. On alien worlds, fear took root in ways governments could not contain. Citizens whispered that humans had always been predators hiding in plain sight. Merchants speculated about the ruin of trade routes. Colonists fled border regions, abandoning settlements that once stood as proud symbols of expansion. The idea that humanity had deliberately concealed its true nature began to feel like betrayal to those who had underestimated them. To others, it was the dawning of respect born from terror. Councils convened emergency sessions to debate whether surrender was possible, but none dared to approach Earth directly. Each attempt at negotiation risked being interpreted as weakness, and the coalition could not agree on whether humanity would even listen. For the first time in generations, the great powers found themselves paralyzed not by politics but by the sheer unpredictability of their opponent. Every possible path seemed to lead to ruin. The galaxy's perception of humans shifted overnight. Once dismissed as frail idealists, they were now viewed as a species forged in fire, carrying scars of endless conflict that no one else had endured. What frightened observers most was not the scale of destruction but the calm with which it was delivered. Humans were not raging, nor were they reveling in conquest. They were exact, clinical, and unshakable, moving with the inevitability of a storm. The coalition's propaganda collapsed under the weight of undeniable evidence. The carefully curated image of human weakness was shattered, replaced by an understanding that every word of courtesy had been a calculated delay. Earth had extended opportunity after opportunity for its enemies to withdraw, and every one of those opportunities had been refused. Now the cost was being collected. Across the stars, empires recalculated their strategies. Treaties were drafted overnight, old hostilities buried in the face of a new terror. Even powers untouched by war began issuing orders to avoid Earth's borders entirely. A single truth settled across countless worlds: humanity had revealed only a fraction of what it could do, and no one wanted to see what might come if pushed further. The guns fell silent not because the humans were exhausted but because they chose to halt. After fleets crumbled and strongholds burned, Earth's armadas stopped their advance at the edge of enemy territory, holding position in a stillness that unnerved even more than the battles themselves. No declaration of victory was issued, no boasts, no demands for spoils. Instead, a single message was transmitted across every open frequency, its delivery calm and deliberate. This is the last warning. Stop attacking, or we stop pretending to be courteous. The words echoed across the networks like a verdict already passed. Alien leaders struggled to comprehend the restraint. They had expected revenge, a sweeping conquest to match the scale of destruction inflicted upon humanity. Instead, Earth's forces simply waited, demonstrating dominance without indulgence. That decision carried its own terror. If humans could annihilate coalition fleets so completely yet walk away without conquest, then what boundaries governed their choices? Observers realized that Earth was not driven by expansion or greed but by principle, and principle could be far more dangerous than ambition. Survivors of the conflict returned to their homeworlds with stories that spread like wildfire. They spoke of precision strikes that ended battles in minutes, of opponents who seemed to anticipate every tactic, of commanders who fought with the certainty of predators delivering the final blow. More haunting than the destruction was the composure of humanity itself. Soldiers described opponents who killed without hesitation yet carried themselves with no malice, as though violence was simply a tool they had long mastered. These testimonies reshaped public perception faster than official decrees. Civilians no longer saw Earth as a struggling frontier world but as an apex power hidden in plain sight. Within the coalition, desperation gave way to collapse. Blame spread among leaders, accusations of treachery and incompetence tearing apart once unified councils. Worlds that had sworn loyalty to the cause abandoned their alliances, eager to distance themselves from a catastrophe they could not reverse. Treaties formed overnight between empires that had been rivals for centuries, all united by a singular priority: avoiding further conflict with humanity. The very mention of Earth became enough to silence political squabbles, for no one wished to be the one to provoke them again. On Earth, the mood was starkly different. Reconstruction began swiftly, fueled by the same determination that had carried the people through every attack. Cities scarred by orbital bombardment were rebuilt with speed that astonished outside observers. Where others expected a population drunk on vengeance, they found instead a people resolved to secure peace through strength. The courtesy that had been mistaken for weakness returned, but now it was underscored by credibility. No one could dismiss polite words when they were backed by proof of devastation held in reserve. The legacy of the warning settled across the stars. Alien academies dissected the conflict, teaching new generations that underestimation was the gravest error one could make. Military strategists revised doctrines, inserting clauses that referred specifically to Terran restraint. Diplomatic manuals quoted the final broadcast as an example of absolute deterrence. Even those untouched by war began to shape their policies around avoiding the fate of the coalition. The phrase, "pretending to be courteous," entered alien languages as a proverb, a reminder that kindness might conceal the deadliest power. Humanity itself did not seek to dominate those who had once tried to erase them. They carried on with a quiet confidence, leaving others to wrestle with their fear. By halting instead of conquering, Earth demonstrated that its goal had never been subjugation, only survival and respect. Yet everyone understood the balance had changed forever. Courtesy remained the outward face of humanity, but the galaxy now recognized it as a mask rather than a nature. Beneath it lay a force too dangerous to provoke again. The war ended not with treaties but with silence, a silence born of collective fear. And in that silence, the memory of Earth's last warning endured, carved into history as the line that separated illusion from truth. From that moment forward, every empire knew the cost of pressing humanity too far. They had seen what happens when patience ends, and they would never forget.